The email arrived at 8:02 a.m. Subject line meeting 9 o'clock a.m. No agenda. No explanation. Just my name and Richard Hales. The executive conference room smelled faintly of polished wood and coffee. Richard sat at the far end. Navy suit. Perfect tie. Beside him, Karen from HR rested her hands on a leather folder. Rachel, Richard said, voice flat. Thank you for coming on short notice. Karen smiled politely. It didn't reach her eyes. The board has approved a restructuring, Richard continued. Your position as senior systems architect is being eliminated. Today is your last day. I let the words sit. They didn't sting. Not yet. Karen slid the folder toward me. Severance details are inside. You'll need to return company property and complete your handover by end of day. I nodded once. Understood. Richard leaned back, studying me. Waiting for a reaction. Something to make this feel like a victory. I gave him nothing. 6 weeks earlier, at the annual gala, he had cornered me on the balcony. Scotch on his breath. Tie loosened. You've been on my mind, Rachel, he'd murmured, fingers brushing my wine glass. You and I could do great things together. I'd moved his hand away. Told him I had calls to make. Walked back into the crowd. 2 weeks later, Melissa Grant appeared. A consultant with no technical background. She smiled too much in meetings. Laughed too hard at Richard's jokes. Within days, she was sitting in on core systems discussions she had no business attending. Now, she was replacing me. I left the conference room without another word. The hallway felt narrower than usual. Conversation stopped when I passed. My office door closed behind me with a soft click. I pulled the cardboard box from under my desk, the one every senior tech keeps, just in case. Framed photo from last summer's trail hike. Stainless coffee tumbler. A notebook of hand-drawn architecture diagrams, mine, not the bank's. On top, I placed a flash drive with sanitized public documentation of our systems. Enough for them to operate. Not enough to understand. The monitor still showed the network dashboard. All green. Transaction flow steady. Failover clusters idle. I'd built every layer that cross-linked safeguards, the silent scripts that caught problems before they spread. I knew what would happen if someone touched them without knowing how they worked. At 11:15, I walked the operations floor toward the elevators. Screens reflected in glass partitions. My team glanced up. Some mouthed sorry. Others looked away. Melissa stood outside the server room. Blazer tailored sharp. Arms folded. Big changes, she said, tone bright and hollow. Always are, I replied, stepping past her. Richard's voice carried from somewhere behind me. Low. Confident. Already moving on. The elevator doors closed. I caught my reflection in the mirrored wall. Calm. Controlled. Outside, February wind cut through my coat. The city moved as if nothing had shifted. In my pocket, the severance folder bent against my hand. The cardboard box felt light. I didn't look back at the building. Not yet. I joined Graystone Bank 9 years ago. Back then, the core transaction system was a patchwork of outdated software and half-documented integrations. It failed twice in my first month. By the end of my first year, I'd rebuilt the security architecture from the ground up. No more midnight crashes. No more unexplained transaction delays. The board called it an investment that paid for itself. I didn't chase credit. I chased stability. The kind of stability customers never see, but notice the moment it's gone. Over the years, I became the person they called at 2 a.m. When a data center in Dallas overheated, I rerouted the entire regional load to Chicago without losing a single transaction. When a malware attack slipped past perimeter defenses, I closed the breach before it reached the payment gateways. My team respected me because I protected them. I never asked anyone to do something I hadn't already done myself. The recognition from leadership was quieter. A nod in the hallway. A seat at the quarterly strategy meetings. It was enough. Until Richard Hale arrived. He came in 6 months ago, all bright smiles and magazine cover competence. The board had hired him to modernize the brand and drive public engagement. His background was in marketing. From the start, his attention felt different. Not focused on my work, but on me. The first time he asked me to dinner, I said I had deadlines. The second time, I told him directly that I preferred to keep things professional. His expression didn't change, but his calendar did. Meetings I'd always been in suddenly happened without me. My name disappeared from email threads about system upgrades. 2 weeks later, Melissa Grant appeared. She was introduced as a fintech consultant brought in to streamline processes. Her resume was light on actual technical work but heavy on networking events and relationship management. At first, she sat quietly in meetings, jotting notes. Then she started asking questions, not the kind that clarify, but the kind designed to steer the conversation. Richard encouraged her. Soon, she was attending closed-door planning sessions with executives. I'd hear her voice through the glass, talking about fast-tracking projects I'd spent months carefully sequencing to avoid risk. Small things began to shift. My travel request stalled in pending 4 weeks. My budget for system redundancy upgrades was cut in half. Junior engineers I'd mentored were reassigned to support Melissa's initiatives. I kept my focus on the work I still had. There were vulnerabilities in the payment reconciliation module I wanted to address before they became problems. I documented my recommendations, sent them to the CTO, and never heard back. By the 4th month of Richard's tenure, Melissa was sitting at my desk more often than I was. She'd lean over my monitors, asking my team about code she didn't understand, pretending it was harmless curiosity. The team didn't say anything to me directly, but I saw the discomfort in their faces. One Friday afternoon, Richard stopped by my office unannounced. He closed the door, smiled. Melissa is taking on more responsibility. I want you to focus on handover. It'll be good for the organization. There was no mention of why. No acknowledgement of what I'd built. Just a smooth, corporate pivot toward inevitability. I asked him one question. Does she even have clearance to access the core? He paused just long enough to confirm the answer. We'll make sure she does. After he left, I sat in the silence of my office, the hum of the server room down the hall a reminder of the system's heartbeat. A heartbeat I'd kept steady for nearly a decade. I knew then that my time was running out. Still, I kept working. Documenting everything. Not because I wanted to help them, but because I wanted the record clear. If they were going to dismantle what I'd built, I wouldn't be the one blamed for the fallout. The morning of the gala came 3 weeks later. I remember the balcony, the city lights, the weight of his hand on my glass. The casual arrogance in his voice. I remember thinking, if this is how he behaves in public, what is he like in private? That night, I realized something else. In his eyes, I'd stopped being an asset the moment I stopped being an option. 2 weeks after that, the meeting request hit my inbox. No agenda. No explanation. Just my name and his. And the rest unfolded exactly as I expected. The first week after the gala, Melissa's presence in my world became constant. She began requesting system overviews to better understand operations. I kept my explanations surface level, pointing her to the official documentation. She didn't ask follow-up questions. 2 days later, I overheard her in the hallway speaking to one of the project managers. We'll need to simplify the architecture, she was saying. Too many redundancies. It slows us down. That phrase, too many redundancies, told me everything I needed to know. She had no idea that the redundancies were the reason Graystone hadn't had a catastrophic outage in years. I started paying closer attention. In the operations floor, she lingered by developers' desks, asking about modules she'd never worked on. In meetings, she suggested replacing legacy scripts with modern tools that would bypass custom security checks. Richard backed her every time. One afternoon, while passing by the Glassodon strategy room, I caught my name in the middle of a sentence. Richard's voice. Once Rachel's gone, we can roll out the changes without pushback. I kept walking, face neutral. Inside, the temperature dropped a few degrees. That night, I logged into the monitoring console from home. The system was as stable as ever. But I knew their changes would target a section of the architecture I'd personally built, a mesh of cross-linked security triggers tied into transaction reconciliation. It wasn't a flaw. It was a safeguard. If the mesh detected a conflict it couldn't resolve, it would automatically suspend affected transaction nodes to prevent corruption. That meant frozen transactions until the right fix was applied. Handled correctly, it was invisible to customers. Handled wrong, it could lock up the bank's entire transaction pipeline. Melissa wouldn't know how to handle it. The next morning, I found her in my office chair, scrolling through a network diagram on my monitor. She didn't bother to stand. Just familiarizing myself, she said, smiling without looking at me. I walked past her, opened my desk drawer, and retrieved a small portable drive. It contained my personal archive, sanitized configuration notes, scripts I'd authored, and, most importantly, system logs proving every major deployment I'd done. All dated, all stored legally. I slipped it into my bag. From that day, I stopped giving verbal explanations. Every request for information was met with a link to the same public documentation. My team noticed but didn't comment. 2 weeks before my termination, Melissa announced in a team meeting that she'd be leading the upcoming optimization project. The goal: cut deployment times in half. The method: remove unnecessary complexity. She never mentioned that complexity was the only thing keeping the system resilient. In the following days, she began scheduling code reviews without me. Developers were told to reroute approvals through her. Change logs showed she'd already flagged several deprecated components for removal, including 2 scripts embedded in the redundancy mesh. I exported the logs. Saved them to my personal archive. It was clear now. Richard had no intention of just pushing me aside. He wanted Melissa in my chair, making visible improvements the board could applaud. Short-term wins. Long-term disaster. The Friday before my termination, I walked the server floor one last time with full access. I checked every failover route, every trigger sequence. Everything was clean, stable, humming like it had for years. I left all my official documentation intact enough to keep operations running, provided the next person respected the design. But the redundancy mesh? The subtle interplay of scripts? That knowledge existed only in my head and in my private notes. By Monday morning, my access was already shrinking. Functions I'd used daily now returned permission denied. That's when I knew the end was immediate. I didn't panic. I didn't try to salvage a position that was already gone. I focused on 2 things: leaving with my record intact, and making sure that if they dismantled what I'd built, the consequences would be theirs alone. On my final day, I copied the latest system logs to my archive drive, the before snapshot. If anyone tried to claim later that I'd caused a failure, the logs would prove otherwise. As I packed the last of my things, I glanced at the monitoring dashboard one more time. Every indicator was green. The transaction flow was seamless. It would stay that way until someone touched what they didn't understand. I closed the laptop, slid it into the return bin, and walked out. The February wind cut sharper than the week before. I adjusted my scarf and stepped into the street. The building behind me kept running. The people inside thought they'd won. They hadn't seen what was coming. The Monday after I left, I woke up at 7:00 a.m. out of habit. No alarm. No meetings on my calendar. The quiet felt unnatural. I made coffee, sat by the window, and opened my personal email. 3 new messages from former colleagues, each worded carefully, like they knew I'd already signed HR's confidentiality clause. Things are different now. Melissa's running the optimization project. She's already cut some scripts she wrote. I closed the laptop without replying. By Thursday, another email arrived. This one from Jonah, one of the senior devs I'd mentored. Subject line: do you know why the reconciliation module is lagging? I read the message twice. The redundancy mesh was part of that module. If they'd removed even one of the trigger scripts, delays would start appearing within hours. I didn't respond. Friday evening, I went for a run along the river. My phone buzzed 3 times in 10 minutes. Jonah again. Then Priya from QA. Then an unfamiliar number. I ignored all of them. On Monday, I had my first interview with a competing bank, a smaller institution with a cleaner reputation and a budget for real infrastructure. The CTO, a man named Alan Reeves, asked me what had prompted my interest in moving. I'm looking for an environment where stability is valued over speed, I told him. He smiled like he'd been waiting to hear that. Back at Graystone, Melissa's changes were accelerating. I knew this not because anyone told me. Most had stopped contacting me directly, but because the symptoms were predictable. First, transaction batch processing would slow. Then, status dashboards would misreport completed jobs as pending. Eventually, a cascading series of conflict flags would trigger the mesh's self-protect mode. I'd built it to freeze affected nodes rather than risk corrupted transactions. The only way to clear it was to trace the error back through the chain of triggers, a process Melissa had once called a waste of time. 2 weeks after my departure, an email from a former vendor contact slipped into my inbox. Subject: everything okay over there? The body was short: we've seen unusual settlement delays on your end. Just checking. It had begun. That Friday night, I sat in my kitchen reading a book when my phone lit up with a call from Richard Hale. The name glowed on the screen for a full 30 seconds before I let it roll to voicemail. The message was short. Rachel, we need to talk. Call me back. Please. I poured another glass of wine instead. The next morning, my inbox held 3 new messages from people still inside. Screenshots of frozen dashboards. Timestamps on transactions stuck in limbo. One note from Jonah: we can't find the source. Melissa says we need to disable the mesh entirely. Disabling the mesh would be like tearing out the brakes on a car because the pedal felt stiff. They'd learn that soon enough. I deleted the messages. On Sunday evening, a second voicemail from Richard. His voice carried an edge now. We're having a situation. The board is asking questions. If you know what's happening, you should. The rest cut off. Monday morning, my interview with Alan Reeves turned into an offer. Director of Systems Architecture. Higher salary. Full autonomy over technical decisions. Start date flexible. I accepted before lunch. By midweek, Graystone's issues had reached the press. A short article in the business section of the Herald mentioned technical disruptions and customer dissatisfaction. No details, but I could read between the lines. That night, Jonah called from his personal phone. It's a mess in here, he said without preamble. Half the transaction nodes are frozen. Melissa's in panic mode. Richard's been in the server room all day, like that's going to help. They've brought in outside consultants, but no one understands how the mesh works. I didn't answer his unspoken question. Instead, I asked, are you okay? Yeah. For now. He hesitated. You're not coming back, are you? No, I said. 2 more days, and the cracks became chasms. The bank's call centers were flooded. Customers complained about mortgage payments not posting, deposits not appearing. Social media turned it into a storm. Thursday afternoon, Melissa tried to blame legacy architecture in a company-wide email. A mistake. Everyone who'd worked under me knew the system had been solid for years. By Friday, the Herald ran a follow-up: Graystone Bank facing systemic outages, sources cite leadership missteps. The subhead named both Richard Hale and Melissa Grant. I read it over coffee in a downtown cafe, the hum of conversation around me like white noise. Outside, the wind rattled the windows. My phone vibrated against the table. Richard again. I silenced it. That evening, Jonas sent one final message. Consultants say it could take weeks to rebuild. Board is furious. Melissa's on leave. Richard's barely hanging on. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the weight of that settle. Not satisfaction. Not triumph. Just inevitability. The thing about complex systems is this: you can't fake understanding. You either respect the design or you break it. And once it breaks, no one cares about your intentions. They care about results. I'd given Graystone nearly a decade of stability. They traded it for speed and optics. Now, they had neither. The storm hit on a Wednesday morning. I was at my kitchen table, laptop open, coffee cooling beside me. An alert popped up on my phone, an automated message from a system I'd built years ago. The kind of message that only went out when multiple core functions were failing at once. I didn't work there anymore. But the system still recognized my number. Old habits die slowly, even in code. By noon, 2 more alerts. The failures were stacking. And then the calls began. First from a junior engineer whose voice trembled on voicemail. Then from the operations manager. Then from him, the CEO. I let them all go unanswered. I pictured the office in chaos. Support tickets piling up. The new streamlined infrastructure folding under pressure it had never been tested for. Every corner they'd cut now cutting back, deep and fast. By evening, my former colleague Mark sent a text. Systems down across the board. Finance locked out. Clients furious. I stared at the screen for a moment before setting the phone face down. The next day, HR called. This time the voice was sugar-coated, the tone all soft edges. They wanted me just for a quick consultation. Generous compensation, of course. I said I'd think about it. I didn't need to. Inside, there was no rush of victory. No spike of adrenaline. Just a quiet understanding they were paying the price they'd set for themselves the day they walked me out. By Friday, the company's biggest client had gone public with their frustration. A terse statement on LinkedIn: we expect our partners to maintain operational integrity. We are reviewing our relationship. I didn't have to guess what that meant. If that client left, the hole in revenue would be visible from space. Late that night, another knock on my door. He was standing there, the CEO, in a suit that looked like it had been slept in. Everything's down, he said. No preamble. No charm. Just exhaustion and fear. I leaned against the frame. That sounds serious. It is. We need your help. You made it clear you didn't need me. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Regret, maybe. Or calculation. I was wrong. We'll pay whatever you ask. I thought about the meetings where he'd smiled through his teeth while dismantling everything I'd built. The way he'd handed my role to someone who hadn't earned it, just because she was his affair. The months I'd watched him trade stability for shortcuts, skill for showmanship. I'm working elsewhere now, I said. I can't help you. Not even for a day? Just to get us back online? You'll figure it out. I closed the door slowly, leaving him on the porch under the weight of his own decisions. Over the weekend, Mark sent another update. Half the engineering team had walked out. The rest were looking for the exit. The affair, my replacement, had stopped coming to the office altogether. Her name was being quietly erased from internal projects. On Monday, a trade publication picked up the client's statement. By Tuesday, 2 more clients hinted they might follow. And on Wednesday, I heard the board had scheduled an emergency meeting. It wasn't hard to imagine the conversation. Numbers on a screen. Anger behind closed doors. The sudden realization that a profitable company can be undone not by a competitor, but by arrogance and neglect. By Thursday, the CEO called again. His voice was thinner this time, stripped of authority. She's gone, he said without naming her. The team's in shambles. The board wants you back, full pay. Signing bonus. Whatever it takes. I let the silence stretch. When I spoke, it was slow and steady. It's not about money. It's about how you treat the people who keep you standing. He didn't respond. And I didn't fill the space for him. We both knew there was nothing left to say. The call ended, and the silence felt final. I slipped the phone into a drawer and left it there. The next morning, I walked into my new office with a clear head. The glass walls caught the early light, throwing it across clean desks and quiet screens. My team greeted me with nods that meant trust, not obligation. Alan Reeves met me at my desk. Board signed off on the redundancy upgrades, he said. You'll have full control of the rollout. I didn't say much. Just opened my notebook and started writing. In the background, Graystone's collapse played out like a storm you can see from miles away. Their press releases grew shorter, their language more careful. Stabilization efforts underway became ongoing disruptions. Committed to excellence became rebuilding trust. By Friday, Richard Hale resigned. The headline was small, but the damage wasn't. The stock had dropped 12% in a month. 3 major clients had pulled contracts. Melissa's name didn't make the news. It rarely does when someone leaves in disgrace without a title to anchor the story. Jonah sent one last message: it's over. Thank you for not coming back. We needed to see this through. I typed a reply and deleted it. Some things don't need to be said. That weekend, I bought groceries, walked the river path, and let the winter air clear my lungs. For the first time in years, I wasn't checking my phone for after-hours alerts. No one expected me to save them from a crisis they'd built themselves. On Monday, I drafted the first chapter of our resilience playbook. It began with 5 words: respect the system you run. By noon, the framework was taking shape: diagrams, test protocols, fallback layers. No hidden traps, no obscure dependencies. The people after me would know exactly how it worked, and exactly why. In the afternoon, I stood with Alan in the server room, cold aisle humming at a steady 62 degrees. Looks clean, he said. It will stay that way, I replied. We're not in the business of quick wins. That night, I sat by the window in my apartment with the city spread out below. Lights moved in patterns I understood: predictable, deliberate. Systems working as they should. The phone in the drawer stayed quiet. If Graystone wanted to call again, they'd find no one on the other end. I thought of the day they'd walked me out, cardboard box in hand. Of Melissa standing by the server room door with her hollow smile. Of Richard's voice, smooth and certain, selling the illusion of control. None of them had it now. Control belongs to the people who understand the structure beneath the surface, the ones who know which parts can bend and which will break. I didn't need to watch Graystone rebuild. I didn't need to remind them what they'd lost. The system had done that for me, exactly as designed. When the last of the winter light faded, I closed my laptop and turned off the desk lamp. My work here was just beginning, but it was mine. And I intended to keep it running.